I'll turn it over to Kristin now so everyone can introduce themselves.
All right, thanks. Welcome, everybody. So we're talking disability and access today, and I'm going to each of our incredible panelists are going to introduce themselves and talk about why this is important to them, and I will talk about why it's important to me. And I know that we know a lot of people in this room and at this conference, this is important to you also because it impacts your life. However, I want to talk a second before we kick off of our why to why this should be important to everyone. Listen to these statistics. The U.S. Office of Disability Employment Policy says people with disabilities make up the third largest market in the United States. Discretionary income from working age people with disabilities, you guys, $21 billion. Your bottom line, it impacts to pay attention to this kind of stuff. And then in terms of workforce, folks, Accenture reported that companies that hire people with disabilities, 28% higher revenue, double the net income, and 30% higher economic profit margins than their competitors. Paying attention to accessibility for people with disabilities is good for all of us and gives everyone the competitive advantage. Now, let's find out who these rock stars are that are up here with me that are going to give you a ton of information about why this is important. Rachelle?
Hi, I'm Rachelle. I have a rare disease called catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, which is a lot of words to say a potentially deadly adrenaline-induced heart arrhythmia. I also have Harlequin syndrome that came as part of a surgery that I had to treat my CPVT. I also was lucky enough to be one of the CPVT patients that are autistic. It's about 10% or 10 times more likely in the CPVT population than normal population. I got my bachelor's from the University of Alabama in adapted sports and my master's in assistive technology from the University of Pittsburgh, where I interned at the Center for Assistive Technology. I'm a Resna certified assistive technology professional, and I'm so sorry for how many times I'm going to say assistive technology. I love AT because as a part of my rare disease journey, I learned very quickly that there are a lot of problems that you cannot fix. But with AT, a lot of the times I am able to fix a fair amount of problems, or at the very least make them less annoying.
Awesome. Kendra?
I am Kendra Gottsleben, and I have a rare condition, broad term, mucopolysaccharidosis type 6. I was diagnosed at the age of 4. I work at the University of South Dakota Medical School within the Center for Disabilities. And I always say I live in two worlds of rare disease and disability. So at work, I'm the marketing and communication specialist, and so we talk a lot about access and physical access and digital, and so my journey has, with access and accessibility, obviously because I'm in a wheelchair, but then also just been very passionate in that space in general.
It's
All
me
right,
now.
Lori.
Yeah, I'm a mom. I teach English literature in Austria. I am a patient advocate for hereditary spastic paraplegia in the European Reference Network for Rare Neurological Diseases. And my movie, Pass Me the Potatoes, Please, will be shown tomorrow after the plenary. So make sure that you come.
Awesome. Didn't I tell you they were rock stars? I'm like, oh my God, I better be on my A game sitting here with these ladies. Actually, we got together last night in the lobby and had ourselves a hootenanny talking about access and disability. I don't know, we just have a lot of fun with our topics. So let's dive into this real quick. Let's do a quick check-in of why this is important to you all. So I'll start off by saying, and I forgot to say that I'm the founder of the Curing Retinal Blindness Foundation, 2 of my 3 kids were born with a rare blindness. But here's the thing. So I started CRBF, like 13 years ago. My son Michael, right at the time that my oldest blind son, when he was going to college, so he was 18, we had been doing this, I don't know. I don't do math when I wear lip gloss, ladies, so we can figure out the numbers later. So anyway, he was 18 and he was going off to college, and we were getting very close to, we had just raised like our first $1 million, and Luxturna was approved and all these great things. And a friend of mine said to him, Michael, are you excited? A cure is right around the corner. And he said, I love all the work that everybody's doing, but I am so well equipped with the tools that I need to access a world that I can't see. I'm going to college as a blind guy because that's what I know. But when I come back, if there's something available, I'll think about it, right? So now my friend was furious. She's like, you've dedicated your life to this. And I'm like, man, as a mom, that's success, right? He's comfortable in his own skin, he's got everything he needs, and he's off in the world. Imagine then, 4 years later, he's graduating Penn State University, top 0.5% of 10,000 graduates. No one will hire him because of the white cane. They didn't understand how to make a workplace accessible. They were afraid of disability, right? So people think that the worst sentence I ever heard was, your son is blind. Actually, the worst sentence I ever heard was when Michael called me and he said, Mom, where are we at with that cure? The world isn't ready for people thriving with disabilities. They're not ready to embrace accessibility. So Philly moms get all pissed off and angry about that and go into action. But let's talk about you all that are a little more calm than me. Give us the short version of why this is so important to you, Rachelle.
I'm really passionate about making all spaces, including digital spaces, accessible. Over 98% of websites are not accessible, which is sad in a few ways. Kind of pathetic. And I'm, like Kendra, I'm in the disability advocacy world, and I noticed that accessibility isn't talked about as much in the rare disease world as I would have thought. And in my rare disease group, people are very much like, no, I'm not disabled, like it doesn't cause me any problems. And while I will recognize that it's a weird line to straddle, because like if I'm being affected by my rare disease, I am dead. So like it's weird to be like, I struggle with things, because it's not like, oh, I can't like get in the building. It's like, this is having some mental health struggles. But I just lived my life delusional for like 12 years until I was very casually telling my therapist this like whole situation, like, the little rare disease spiel, and she's looking at me and she's absolutely horrified. She's like, so that was like a big thing in your life then? And I was like, no, I just ignored it. And she was like, you did what? So, I guess I'm here to say it's important, and mental health matters, and disabilities don't always look the way we think they do.
I love that line. I might make a t-shirt that says that. Kendra, your why?
For me, after the college experience in China, kind of like your son, looking for the jobs, I got one of the first things I wanted to do. I was growing up in the healthcare world, obviously, because I have what I have, but then having parents that are in the education field, the hospital setting, seemed fun. And I wanted to try to get a job at the hospital, but first thing was like, oh, you're in a wheelchair. And so a lot of it was like, hitting that mind wasn't able to, think outside the box. And so with accessibility, physical accessibility was the first thing that's personal from my journey, getting into spaces, lovely ramps like that. Those things are really passionate for me, because when you have ramps sign language interpreters. When your website is accessible, it creates a welcoming experience for those of us with disabilities and rare diseases. And like Rachelle had said, you know, the rare disease space hadn't been really you hadn't heard a lot about that. And so that's kind of where my passion has become more of that, because we want everyone, no matter what their journey is, to feel like they belong in any room that they're at.
Awesome.
I'm going to actually almost say this, like, sort of the same thing, but I'm here to just spread the awareness that, or spread the understanding that the word inclusion does not just, what do I want to say? Yeah, the word inclusion is not just a word. That like if you are an organization or a venue or, certainly a public facility, that you need to make everyone who comes to your place feel invited, and that they're not just, that everyone has different needs. So I'm kind of saying the same thing as you.
You know what? I'm sitting here thinking, like, I didn't look through this lens 24 and a half years ago until the first blind person I ever met, and that was my firstborn son. I didn't look through the lens, but when I look through it now, of inclusion is not just a word, it's actually when it's a value and a culture.
Not just paying lip service to
not just checking the box, you can tell, right? Like, you can really tell. And that's why I say it's a competitive advantage. So I think we were talking last night about when I took my middle son, who, by the way, every time I reference Mitchell, my middle son, you will see gray hair just shooting out of my head, because he is a true middle child, and he just is probably up to something right now that I'm going to hold on to my hat. But I took him to see Dropkick Murphys, that concert, and we were in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, drove through a sideways snowstorm, right, to get there. But they had, and if you know Dropkick Murphys, it's a real fast rock band, and they had people switching in and out doing sign language interpretation. I didn't notice it at first, but when I was there in the concert and they're real entertaining, I thought, man, there's a different vibe here. There's just a different, and then you see the inclusion that they had built in. They didn't call attention to it. It was just this cool thing, and I will say, it was pretty cool to watch these sign language people go super fast, right? But I thought it's a vibe, it's an element that you feel differently, and I think it was Kendra said it's a welcoming thing.
And I think a lot of things like that, you are starting to see more of it, but it's still, like anything, has a long ways to go.
Okay, you just teed that up perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, we rehearsed all of this last night. We didn't just party on and tell funny stories. That tees up perfectly the videos that we have a long way to go. Ooh, right? Okay. So should we look at me being the tech savvy sort of.
You guys tomorrow make sure that you compliment my this part of my hair and maybe just a sliver of my forehead. But the rest, I have no idea what I'm gonna look like. Oh. You can give commentary.
Wie soll das jemand schaffen, mit dem Rollstuhl da hinaufzukommen? Dann vielleicht noch.
Oh, here, I think. This is how you're supposed to do it.
Ja, super. Und dann vielleicht noch das Tor zu öffnen. Wie soll das möglich sein? Und jetzt ist das Tor geschlossen. Oh.
You can give commentary.
Okay, so Lori, tell us what we were, wait a minute, let me go back to the first one. Tell us in the first video what we were looking at. Can you guys help me out and get this back up there?
Go backwards.
Oh, wait.
Maybe with no sound.
Or just, why don't you tell us what we're looking at, and then I'm gonna pull it up.
Okay, yeah, but, I mean, it was pretty self-explanatory. I literally got into the hotel room, went into the bathroom, and I started laughing because it was ridiculous. It was just this part of my head, that's it. Yeah, there's really nothing more to say, but it was very clear that a person had never sat in a wheelchair to see if that was going to be acceptable.
And what was your one suggestion about that would make the difference here about a person experiencing this?
What do you mean?
A person that runs the hotel, what could they do?
Well, they could sit in a wheelchair, or they could hire me to sit in a wheelchair and do that. Or what they could do is, it's not very difficult to have a mirror that has a lever on it so that you could pull it down and see. Yeah.
And was this marketed as an accessible restroom?
That's the thing. This hotel was handicap accessible, but it was not.
So here's where all this matters for this is what our call to action is throughout this entire session for all of you. I understand that we may just be, just a few folks here are experiencing wheelchair, getting through the world in a wheelchair. But what if all of us, when we were at a hotel, what if every single one of us at a hotel goes, wait a minute, you say that this is handicap accessible, and how would a person in a wheelchair access that mirror? What if what do we have, 700 people? Here, what did John Crowley say? In 2 years, we went 9,000 on Capitol Hill. But could you imagine the power then of just going up to the manager saying, dude, I noticed that you say this is handicap accessible.
I actually didn't even put it in the video, but to get into my room, I had to open a door that weighed about 3,000 pounds.
Oh yeah.
So that was another difficult thing.
Is that what you were going to say, Kendra?
Well, no, what I was going to say is that's the thing. When businesses or hotels or companies, there's the ADA, and then like when I was saying the welcoming, and then there's going beyond the ADA standards where even a short person, which I'm really short, but I'm still in a wheelchair, even a shorter person wouldn't be able to see in that mirror. And so some things that I think some people need to do is creating focus groups of all different types of disabilities, not just individuals with wheelchairs, but you need to do a tour or, an accessibility guide and seeing what are the things that events, businesses, organizations are missing. And that's one way to kind of doing that for a physical space. And then Rachelle has more experience in the digital space.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, Lori, you talked about heavy doors. Me and Kendra were talking about how the doors, she has an accessible room at the hotel, and
so
today, in questionable design choices, their door swings open. I have a sliding barn door in my non-accessible room, which is actually the more accessible option. Yes.
Ooh, I want your room.
The doorway's probably not wide enough. Having just gone in a hotels like with a walker, and you're like, well, I guess I'll just shimmy halfway through because I thought I was going to be able to make it. It was a lie. But yeah, the digital space, 98% of websites are not accessible, which means that pretty much any website you go to is probably not accessible. One easy way to kind of see some accessibility problems is to try to navigate by keyboard. That's how many blind people will navigate instead of using a mouse in combination with a screen reader. And a lot of times you get stuck in a nice little pop-up, like the little cookies pop-ups, and then you're stuck and you can't get out. But it's kind of a good litmus test to see if there's going to be problems, because if you can navigate that website and get somewhere by keyboard, probably doing pretty okay. If you can't, I can tell that there's already going to be a lot more problems to be unearthed if someone were to do an audit.
Here's another thought to put all of this in perspective. And I often say, well, I always say, because I've gotten a little bossy about this because it's driving me crazy, but I'm like, design in terms of websites, let's just talk digital spaces for a second. If you design a website that you just pretend that everyone coming to it is blind, right? Just pretend that like that's like your like most drastic accessibility need, right? Here's what happens. When you design it that way, you're now looking at not having stuff all over it, right? And you've got alt text on the pictures that describe things. And quite frankly, I've seen some of the websites in our community. I don't know what the heck is happening right away in some pictures, and the alt text would really be helpful to me to say, here's what you're looking at, right? But then you also got, when you look at like fonts that are bigger and bolder for a visually impaired person, you're also now being inclusive and welcoming, as Kendra said, to people with print disabilities. Or, I learned this with my children's book, dyslexic folks. There are certain fonts that are easier for people with dyslexia.
Dyslexia. Yeah.
We are brilliant and fun folks, but words are a challenge for us. Did you want to add something?
Words are hard.
Words are hard.
Well, and that's the thing is, even people, you know, I think when you think of blind, a lot of people think blind is can't see anything. And that's the difference. There's a spectrum. So even the frilly, fun fonts that are like, is that an F?
Yeah.
Is that a T? That like sometimes you want to be super fun and creative, and it's like your message is being missed when you add the frillies.
My personal favorite is when you can't tell if it's a 1, an I, or a lowercase l because they're all the same. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm supposed to read this.
I will say too, think about your social media. Those of you that are like fancy on Instagram and you get that, I don't even know how you do it, get that fancy text, it's completely inaccessible to the voiceover that's built into the iPhone. So there's just a little tidbit. But let's go back to the digital space. So if you design with the blind in mind, like just think of that as a little rhyming thing, right? Design with the blind in mind. Now you're talking, you've got videos, right? If you put a video on there and have a nice descriptive video, but also we were talking about if you put captions on that, someone had the percentage of, it's like 80 some or more % of people don't even put sound on, they're reading the captions.
Yeah, 90% of people who use captions are hearing.
Right? I mean, these are like, so when you think about, I know that we always kind of thought about this as like, you have to. And I know, we can move into this too, actually I meant to do this segue. You do that, like the FDA came out and said, you have to make clinical trials inclusive. You have to, right? And then I'm sitting there and I'm out there talking about, well, if you make them inclusive, people came to me, how do you make them inclusive for the blind? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. And then I'm like, wait a minute, again, if you design a clinical trial with the blind in mind, with people with disabilities in mind, what happens, what's the big challenges in our organizations and in pharma with them, right? Patient engagement to even, stay involved. Trust in the first place. Are they going to trust you to even participate in this thing, right? And then all the barriers and the bandwidth issues that it takes to participate. Now, what if we flip it and look through a different lens, and let's talk about designing clinical research, clinical trials with people with disabilities in mind. What does that look like? We need music that goes, ah!
I really just lost my train of thought.
We do that too. But then we rescue each other.
I don't know if anyone has heard of the curb cut effect, but it's kind of like how when you design for disabilities, you make everyone's life a little bit easier because curb cuts are essential for people in wheelchairs. But they're also really...
Can you say that? What word is that again?
The curb cut effect?
The curb cut. Okay.
Yeah. But they're also really helpful for people with strollers or like the Amazon guy who's bringing you like your dog food. Or...
Is this the dip in the corner of the
Yes.
sidewalk? Okay. Think of a street crossing. Okay.
Yeah. Are people with suitcases really helpful, make everyone's life a little bit easier. But going back to clinical trials, inclusive design is really undervalued, but it's really important from like the consent process to your collection methods. I need to stop talking with my hands. It's really important to prioritize accessibility because you know that disabled people will be there because you literally invited them. And they're doing a lot for you. You know, they're basically, to be blunt, they're allowing you to borrow their body for science. Like, that's a big sacrifice. And I don't think anyone does it on purpose. I think a fair amount of the problems stem from, there's an assumption that hospitals and the process are, in general, accessible, and that's just not true. And also a misunderstanding of what accessibility is, as kind of like a caveat. Like, if I have to ask for help, it's not accessible because other people don't have to ask to help to get there, unless, of course, everyone needs to be escorted to a certain location, in which case, whatever. You know, sometimes getting assistance is the only way that you can make it work, but that's not generally best practice, and it should not be the go-to situation, even though it oftentimes is. Yeah.
Awesome. Thoughts, Kendra, on that?
For me, when I think of the healthcare field and stuff, I'm kind of a unique person because I'm an adult, but I'm the size of a child. So sometimes instruments or like the tables, sometimes there are accessible, you know, things, but sometimes they're not. And it's sometimes when there's not a lot of me's or, you know, in situations, sometimes healthcare professionals, they don't know what to do, and they just kind of freeze up, some of them, not all of them, but kind of helping the healthcare industry, you know, kind of like what Rachelle said, that they think that they're all accessible, but the mindset and everything is different. And I'm a perfect example where I still see ped patients or doctors, so I'm okay there, but then, you know, when I go into the adult world space, I kind of become a little like, I don't know what to do with this. You know, so you have to be a little more, for me, I become more of an advocate in saying, these are the things I need in my chart with the, you know, that's one of the things that's been good with digital too, in that aspect of accessibility. Now, you can get schedule appointments and things like that. But for me personally, sometimes I confuse people.
Oh, I do too, Kendra. I overwhelm people. Lori, let's shift gears for a hot second here.
Yeah, actually, you said, Rachelle said something that made me think again about the hotel. When I left the hotel, the attendant at the front desk receptionist, do you call it, right? Sure. The front desk receptionist, she was like, "How was your stay?" I said, "Not good," and she was like, "What?" I mean, she was nice, but she didn't understand because the handicap accessible room had been, excuse me, had been used for years, and no one had ever said anything.
Wow.
No one had said anything. So also going back to what you said about 9,000 people, like everyone saying something would be like a super good thing.
So along those lines, let's get some practical things happening here. What would you say would be some things that us as advocacy organizations, let's start with us, what can we do to change this? What are some practical things, like if we're planning events or out there in the world, what are some things that we can start doing now within our own advocacy groups? And I mean, we can jump in here, anybody here.
I was just going to say, so besides my day job that I mentioned, I started a nonprofit called WIR by Design. And
what's it called again?
WIR by Design.
WIR by Design.
And so I've really strived, and our mission is, you know, celebrating the rare that makes us unique and extraordinary. And every event or everything that we do, like via social media, there's always captioning. There's alt text on our Facebooks and stuff. But then our events, even if there's someone that is not deaf or hard of hearing, I automatically hire interpreters. If I know that there's going to be a stage, I automatically, even obviously I need it, but I would automatically have a ramp. If I'm having a meeting or a venue, or using a venue, or gonna have an event at some space, I make sure it's completely accessible, because as an organization, and I do that a lot at work, because I'm the only one that uses a wheelchair, so my boss will be like, hey, so do you think so-and-so, this place is accessible? And I'll be like, yes. You know, is that having that in mind, because as an organization with rare diseases, yeah, you're gonna have maybe some people with disabilities. So trying to build that into your budget or meeting preparation or event preparation, Global Genes is a perfect example. There's a ramp on every stage. That's not common in a lot of places, and that's the thing is, even if you don't know someone who's gonna need the ramp, it's still a visible acceptance that if someone had a walker or maybe just has one of those boots or something.
Boots with heels.
Yeah.
Those shoes right there.
It makes it much easier. A perfect example of a negative situation that I attended an event back home in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And it was a Women's Leadership Award event. People were nominated. There was like 400 people there. One of my friends who has a rare disease was nominated. She uses a wheelchair. Sadly, I went negative, but I was right. When we went into the venue, they had a stage, there wasn't a ramp. And I knew she hadn't won. It didn't dawn on her, because she was just like, she kind of went to, well, maybe they just didn't think about it. And I'm like, that could have been. And so those are things that even when you had people submit, she was a disability advocate, you know, her photo had her in the wheelchair, and yet there was still no ramp.
Well, you know, and I was sharing last night when we were talking about that with awards. I was at an awards thing this summer, and this giant ballroom, this big sorority thing, and the woman that was working with me as the winner of this thing, she said, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to be up on stage with you to get the picture, because she had something happen and she was using a walker. Now, she's not a person with a disability by 100% of the time. She just, something happened and she was temporarily using a walker. And she said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get up on that stage. And I'm like, you're running the event. Like, tell them to put in a ramp. Are you kidding me? And sure enough, we got there and there was a ramp. And she said, oh, no, this is a very successful woman that does this all the time. She has this brilliant job in the world. And never dawned on her to come. She was under the impression of, oh, they do it this way. It's always been done this way. So I'm just going to have to sit this one out. I was like, sister, get in there. No.
Well, and as an ally, if you're not, like if you're a caregiver or if you're an organization that you don't have a rare disease or disability, as an ally, if you're on these committees or part of these events or organizations, be the person that brings that up, just like that lady was like, well, this is how we always do it. We don't have the guts, and be the person that says, hey guys, have we thought about? That would make a more welcoming event.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hop in because Kendra started talking about budgets. Accessibility should be a line item in your budget, and I'm just gonna say that flat out.
That's another T-shirt.
Thank you. I'll be here all week. But also, we have a little saying in the digital accessibility world that you can spend 20% of your budget planning for accessibility and doing it right the first time, or you can spend 80% of your budget fixing all the mistakes you made because you didn't consider it in the first place. And I don't know if anyone knows the Domino's case, but they were sued by a blind man because he could not order a pizza online. And they were like, well, you could use the phone. And he's like, yeah, but everyone else gets to use it online. And the Supreme Court said, you're right. And they had to pay millions of dollars in fines because it's covered under the ADA. As you know, your websites are basically the same as being able to walk in your front door. So it's important, and it has very expensive consequences.
Yeah, I mean, and to that end, this is not, I know that we're kind of preaching and singing to the choir here, because this is not a group of a community that would go the route of, just to prevent a lawsuit or, that. I know that this is a community looking for all of those competitive advantages, right? And embracing accessibility for people with disabilities gives those competitive advantages. Let's talk for a second about, just in terms of staying with community and our patient advocacy groups, the thinking about the venues and our websites and building community and engagement. When I was talking about doing an in-person event, one of my very good friends that is visually impaired, I was thinking, I'm thinking of all these different things in Philly, my hometown, and I'm like, we could fly into this and then do it at this hotel, and then there's this really cool place for dinner, and we're just talking about people that are blind and low vision. And he was like, oh my God, keep it in one facility. It didn't dawn on me, because I guess I'm just kind of always dragging my kids along. Here we go, But his thing was, this is the word that I want people to remember as you're planning things, and folks in industry, as you're bringing the community together and all that. It's a bandwidth issue. Lowering the bandwidth, right? And constantly, that's why, let's just use this conference as an example. I was just saying to somebody earlier, man, this is wonderful that for me, the elevators are right there. I had to go back up to my room to think about something, because I know there's so many people and I talk to all of them. God forbid I just stop talking and answer the emails I had to do. But the elevators are right there. And then I didn't have to go and find around a whole bunch of hallways and different staircases and where escalators go. And the lunch is right here. I'm not wasting time. And it's not lowering my bandwidth in using all of that all day to access everything that's here. So when we talk about imagine, okay, first of all, the intelligence, the amount of intelligence and experience that is on this stage is mind-blowing. What if all of us could not get into this room and onto the stage to be able to share our experiences, right? All of that knowledge and all of that experience to impact this community. And we couldn't even get here because the website wasn't accessible, or getting into the building wasn't accessible. I mean, Lori, to your, let's go back to your videos. Oh, let's talk about that second video with what you were doing when you're pulling on the railing. Where was that?
That was they had an elevator, an elevator at the. I guess you had to go down the hill to get to the elevator so that you could get to the hotel. However, you needed to check in first in order to get a card key to open up the elevator. But there was no intercom system, so they did not know, they wouldn't even know that I was waiting to check in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I went down the hill. I was with I guess 4 other people that had already checked in, so I was safe. But if I was by myself, I would have been really stranded.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And where was this at?
This was in Innsbruck, so in Austria.
Oh, that's right. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We have the international panel. Just wanted to point that out.
From New
We've
York,
got Austria. Yeah, doesn't she sound like she's from Austria? Born and raised in New York.
Oh, actually, in that second video, there was some German. It was pretty. I think you could have figured it out. Like, how should you get up the hill and then open up the door? I think that's what it said, something like that.
So let's before we get to get into if there's questions in the room, because I want to make sure that these thoughts from all of you are communicated. In terms of this whole concept of accessibility and inclusion of all people, especially people with disabilities, what is just one or two key things? Because I know this is a lot for a lot of minds in here right now, like, wow, inclusion is a lot. It's not as much as you might think. So let's just boil this down to a couple of key things right now and go from there. What would you say yours are, Rachelle?
I mean, kind of what you just said. It is often easier than you think. When people talk about like ADA accommodations that they get for work, there's been some studies that over 70% of them are free, as in $0, and like 90% of them cost less than $500, and that's for someone's entire time overworking. But the second one would be that accessibility starts with a mindset. If you ask yourself how someone else's experience with whatever you're looking at might be different, and then take action to bridge that gap, or even better, ask someone who lives that experience every day, because they can definitely tell you what is easier and what is not easy.
Awesome. Kendra?
I think a lot of us are going to kind of be saying the same thing, but my thing is, I know a lot of, there are some companies that are doing it, and there's some that are not, or there's some that are starting. The first thing is just starting that movement, and once you start it, you will get more comfortable with it. But collaborate with other organizations, other businesses that are already doing it, so that you don't have to make maybe the mistakes right off the bat. Asking individuals that are well-versed in digital accessibility is key, and then having focus groups, visit if you're a building or something, but also just think of kind of like what Rachelle said, is the people that you are inviting to be part of your organization, your business, and put that hat on and start planning from that way.
I think I'm gonna say the same thing. Well, sort of the same thing that you were saying. Just that designers, architects, they need to they need to get the involvement of patients, because they're the ones who know. And I think also that the word inclusion is not just a word.
Yeah, I love that. It really is it's a way of life, it's a vibe, it's a value. And I would say that I would challenge everybody here and watching on the live stream to give thought to talking with your teams and making inclusion a value of your company or organization, and then building around that. And I'll say a quick thing here about when you think about this is so different from when Global Genes first started and I first started in this space, that there are so many clinical trials in design and happening now in the rare disease space, which is tremendous. But here's my additional challenge for you. As you're designing that clinical trial, from the moment that you're going out to find these patients and bring them together, all the way through to getting this, whatever you're working on, to market, consider designing it with people with disabilities, especially because it's one of the most dramatic to most people, especially somebody with a visual impairment. Have them in mind as you design these things. And I'm telling you, this isn't just a mom of 2 blind kids and the advocate for the blind community bossing year round. This is really to make what do we want? We want every single ship in this harbor of rare diseases to rise, and your ships will rise if you consider all the things we've talked about, because of all those statistics that I mentioned in the very beginning. But also consider the fact of even just the clinical trial site. If you have somebody meeting the person that is blind, the person in a wheelchair, at the door, making sure they can access your building first of all, and you have somebody come and make that happen, what starts to happen there? You're starting a relationship. You are now starting a relationship with that patient that's coming in. And what do all things succeed and fail on? Whether there was a relationship built on trust and whatnot, whether that relationship succeeds or fails, well, you start a successful relationship that way. And then give thought to all of the elements that that person goes through to be a part of your ecosystem and your trial. And every spot that you can lower bandwidth, you're going to build and develop that relationship and move from unknown and untrust into trustful and success. And you do that with all of the suggestions that we talked about. And then one thing that is for my little one-liner, my t-shirt, I actually steal from a good friend of mine in the disability space. If you don't know what to do, and not even in the terms of running a patient organization or industry, whatever, here in this space, if you see somebody with a disability and they look like they might need help, or the door is too heavy, or they're trying to get up a freaking hill that is entirely too steep, the simple thing to say, how can I help you be successful? How can I help you be successful? And go from there. So let's pause our final thoughts here, and because we literally talked for hours on this last night, and we could have an entire day on this topic. And let's see if there's any thoughts, questions, people want to chime in from their own lived experience from the audience. I think Pam's got a microphone going around.
Yes, we have one question that's come in online. Does anyone have any suggestion for the hotel room doors that cannot be locked from inside? My son with autism leaves the room, and we have to move tables and chairs behind the door at night to wake. So if he wakes up, he tends to leave. Any ideas?
So there are some, it's called an add-a-lock, and it's like a little thing that you put in the door jamb, and it means that they can't open the door.
Wow. Add-a-lock, it's called?
Add-a-lock. Okay, add-a-lock. Thank you.
Thank you.
One in my bag right now, just in case any of the doors are broken.
We had a question back here, right? Thank you.
Pam's getting her steps in.
Thank you. Hi, I'm a software developer, and so things like this I'm trying to get better at. And what would help is to know some examples of either physical or digital spaces that have done a remarkably good job at being accessible, anything that stands out. And why are they really good?
Physical or digital spaces that you all have found that you can really rave about?
I don't have any example to give. Yeah.
So there's a digital accessibility conference called Access U, and they are the smartest people they're so smart about everything digital accessibility. They can like quote the web content accessibility guidelines to you. I would highly recommend looking that up. And I can't think of any specific websites that have done a good job, because it's rough, but.
There are tools, and you might know the tools, but there are little, the little blue dot with the little icon, and then it says that the website is accessible. There are like components that you can put on the website, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, there's some that you see, I don't know how successful they are, just because I don't need those in that aspect. But there are resources with some of the things like from starting Adobe Acrobat Pro can help you make your PDFs. You can check them, seeing how compliant they are with digital accessibility. Like Canva, I use that for making social media things, and they have built-in tools now, and a lot of software like Microsoft Word, PowerPoint. A lot of companies are starting to see that people need to have that, and they're moving forward with making content, whether it's a paper, PDF, PowerPoint, all of that. So now, luckily, there are a lot of the programs that many of us might use in our day-to-day basis are building that into the software. So those are some tools that you can, if you're not familiar with it, but you can start seeing it, like in Word, it'll tell you how accessible it is, and PowerPoint, you can put alt text and things like that. So luckily there are companies that are starting to build that, so it's getting a little easier.
I remembered some things as she was talking. The Wave toolbar is a good place to start. It's an extension on Google Chrome. You basically go to any website and then you turn it on, and then it will highlight any violations or excessive use of ARIA. And Dax and Chad are, they have a podcast called Chax Chat. And they're like the gurus for PDF accessibility, which is a whole nightmare. Please stop overusing PDFs. They make me cry.
Especially the ones made in Canva. They're completely inaccessible.
They're
when
terrible.
You download it as a PDF, it does not make it accessible.
Yeah. Microsoft Word and the Microsoft Suite is pretty easy to make things accessible. Their accessibility toolbar is pretty good. You can go through the Department of Homeland Security Office of Accessibility Services. They have a certification that does a good job with the Microsoft Suite. Not too great with PDFs, but it'll get you started. That's all I got for now.
I would also suggest a couple of things. Go to the websites of organizations that serve communities with disabilities, such as, I'll give a personal plug, which you can actually compare and contrast these. My Curing Retinal Blindness Foundation, that is the patient organization for the rare eye disease CRB1 LCARP, was professionally designed to be fully accessible, crb1.org, and now we are launching a whole new website with even more accessibility features in terms of high contrast and whatnot, and things that you can toggle, and just the layout of it. The first one that I believe is still current was an insane amount of money. The second version was not as much money. We found a phenomenal web guy that does it on the side, and he has learned a heck of a lot about accessibility and making this thing accessible. Take a look at crb1.org. You can also take a look at my other nonprofit, thrivingblindacademy.org, that was done literally for pennies. I used to say I'm real cheap with the fundraising. I'm frugal, ladies and gentlemen. I am frugal with spending fundraising dollars, and efficient with the funding. So they're two very different examples of spending a lot of money, and you don't really have to spend so much money. And we had people that are using screen readers, voiceover, Zoom text to make the screen bigger. We had all of them tested to make sure that they were accessible. And then I can tell you, in terms of commercial stuff that you all are used to, unfortunately, Amazon is very accessible, and my children shop on that nonstop with my credit card in the shopping cart. Amazon has been very accessible, but they also have a solid team of people with disabilities that are working on accessibility, right? Like, if you don't have people from our community sitting at the table, what is that? Nothing about us without us. Mm-hmm. You're going to run into some headaches. And my kids got so frustrated with the inaccessibility and the need for assistance in a grocery store. Although, everyone, and my kids are 24, 21, and 20. I don't know that many of them, that age group, go into a grocery store anymore. It's all Instacart. And Michael taught, you can order wine from Instacart and have it delivered to your hotel, ladies and gentlemen. My blind son taught me that. But there have been incredible strides for access. We just have a little ways to go here. But those are ones that you can look at. But the other one is Foundation Fighting Blindness. They have a great, look at the color scheme. Look at the option to change the font size and stuff like that. Like just a couple of tools to really for the community to be able to access it.
I want to throw in a couple other suggestions. One is for those of you running conferences that you are interested in making them accessible, if you stop by the Simons Foundation booth, they have copies of the toolkit that Simons did with Global Genes for those of you who are putting together conferences for your groups. And there's extensive information about accessibility, making conferences more accessible.
What was the booth?
Simons Foundation.
Awesome.
Yeah, the booth is right in the corner. The other thing, and maybe you all have other suggestions for this, the informed consent process. You brought up clinical trials and making them, more accessible to people physically. But the informed consent process is really important to be understandable, of course, to know what you're agreeing to do. The one that I think is exemplary is the All of Us research program, which collects data on, I guess their goal was to get 1 million people into their data collection program, but that's a good one to look at. But do you have other suggestions for consent processes that are more accessible?
I don't know about ones that are more accessible, but I will say give thought to, if you have inclusion, exclusion criteria, that the patient has to be able to sign the informed consent, but you don't have an audio version or a way for a person with a visual disability to do that themselves. Think of it in terms of that. And I think that having an audio version would help a heck of a lot of people, not just visually impaired, but other print disabilities or visual processing disorders. You guys have any others?
That's the kind of the philosophy, if you want to keep everything that we're talking about super simple, is if it works for someone with a disability, it works for everyone.
Perfect. Any
that's
other?
probably a great place
t-shirt?
for us to close. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
You've
ladies.
been an amazing panel. I think we've all learned a lot, and I appreciate it. We should give them a hand.
Awesome job.
Okay.